Hey, everybody. Good to have you here today. I'm Julia Rogniski, one of the co-founders of Lift Our Voices here with my other co-founder, Gretchen Carlson. Hey, Gretchen.
Hello. Good morning. Hi, everyone.
How was your weekend?
My weekend was, well, it was kind of sad. My son went back to college, but my daughter came back to stay with me and visit me. So that was good.
Awesome.
But just wait till you get to that. I know you're not there yet. But.
I'm not there yet. I can't wait for my son to go back to school because I've kind of had. But anyway, you and I were talking about this offline, and I think it's important to note. So I don't know if people know, but when Congress goes back into session, Jim Comer, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, is going to do a hearing on the Epstein files and the Epstein scandal. And he has demanded that the Judiciary Committee turn over the files to him, to his committee. Sorry, the Justice Department turn over the files to him. And they're starting to do that in tranches, I guess, which we'll see what they redact. We'll see what they turn over. I have no faith necessarily that Jim Comer, who's a huge ally of this president, is going to release anything generally. But what I find fascinating, Gretchen, is that this committee's also subpoenaed a whole bunch of people. They subpoenaed both Hillary and Bill Clinton. They subpoenaed Jim Comey. They subpoenaed their own former attorney general, and every attorney general going back to Obama. A whole bunch of Robert Mueller as the former chairman, head of the FBI, excuse me. But they haven't asked any of the survivors to testify, or Alex Acosta, who is the former labor secretary, but in his capacity as the U.S. attorney for Florida, for the Southern District of Florida, did not really do anything for the survivors and gave Jeffrey Epstein a very big sweetheart deal, which allowed him to continue raping other girls after that whole project concluded. So what do you make of all this, that they haven't asked the survivors to come and talk to them?
I'm not surprised because the Department of Justice and the Trump administration has not made them a priority as of yet. I mean, it seems like their only priority is to protect themselves or protect other people that could be alleged perpetrators, not necessarily the survivors. And it's actually, even when they went to the grand jury or the judges try and get the grand jury testimony released, that they actually violated a law by not consulting with the survivors first to do that. So, the idea that they would be survivor centric is not surprising that they're not. But we can attest to the fact that when you are survivor centric, that's when you get stuff done. So when we were passing our first law to get rid of forced arbitration for sexual misconduct in the workplace, it was these 4 women being subpoenaed by the House Judiciary. Only because they were subpoenaed could they actually say what had happened to them at work with regard to sexual harassment, because they had been silenced through forced arbitration. And it was those compelling, horrific stories that moved, I think, the hearts and minds of both people in both parties to really realize that we had to do something about this and take it out of the secrecy. So that same logic would apply to these survivors coming forward and having the ability, if they want, only if they want, to say what happened to them and if they want, who the perpetrators were. Again, this would take tremendous courage, because I think right now it's scary enough to come forward and put your name and face on it and relive the whole thing. But when you have the Department of Justice and the Trump administration and MAGA coming out against you, potentially, the only saving grace here is that MAGA actually probably wants to hear from them. I'm not saying they actually care about the survivors, because I think they care more about the conspiracy aspect of this. But it could be that they wouldn't get the MAGA group coming against them like other people would in other situations. What do you think?
I mean, you raise a great point, which is that if you're a survivor and you come forward, and you and I both know this from when you and I came forward at Fox News about misconduct there, especially in a very high profile situation, as yours certainly was. I mean, you were the first to do it at Fox. Mine was high profile in the sense that it was also against a very high profile man, but not like you. It's not just that you're coming forward into a void. I mean, you're coming forward into a massive, massive maelstrom of attention and paparazzi and people hounding you and the media hounding you and others hounding you. And you have to really believe that it's worth it. Now, I think it's worth it. You think it's worth it. Certainly, somebody like a Virginia Giuffre before her sad death, she thought it was me. I don't want to speak for her, but she kept talking. So I assume she thought it was worth it to hold people accountable, because that's how you really do it. And I would hope that these survivors understand that what happened to them over the course of decades, they know this. It's awful. They have been let down every step of the way. You read some of the testimony from the Maxwell hearing, and you have these Jane Does testify. Sorry, not her hearing, her trial. And you have these Jane Does testify. And they testified, one woman testified that she was a little girl. I think she was 14 or 15 or 13 even. And she was at this arts camp in Michigan, a really well-known arts camp, and called Interlochen. And all of a sudden at this camp, she saw two people, two adults, one of whom was Jeffrey Epstein, she found out, one of whom was Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell had a little dog, a little Yorkie. Well, what better way to have little girls come running over to you than to have a cute little dog sitting in your lap? And of course, these little girls come running over, and this is one of the girls who kept running over. And she said, she started talking about the dog, and she said she wanted to be a model and an actress because she's in this performing arts camp. They knew exactly what they were doing. And of course, then Maxwell and Epstein start talking about how she's so pretty and she could model, and that they're very good friends with Lex Wexner, who runs Victoria's Secret, and maybe she's good enough to be in the Victoria's Secret runway show, which of course at the time was the biggest thing in the world. And that's how they ensnared these little girls, with the cute little dogs and promises of stardom. And you hear stories like that, and it's heartbreaking because you could picture this being any of your daughters, anybody, right? Of course, these little girls are going to come over and when they see this cute little Yorkie sitting around. And that's how they get ensnared. And I don't think most people read that testimony. I think most people on both sides of the political equation are thinking about, oh my God, well, maybe some prominent Democrat is in these files, or maybe some prominent Republican is in these files, and we're going to bring down our political opponents. But nobody has thought about what these girls have gone through because nobody's read that testimony. I bet most people hearing this have not heard what I just talked about, how they did it. And it's so important for people to hear that. And I truly just hope that Chairman Comer thinks about that it's really about these girls who are now women who should have the opportunity to tell Congress and the world what happened to them and who let them down, and the fact that they went to the cops, and the fact that they thought that Jeffrey Epstein was going to be stopped. And then not Jim Acosta, Alex Acosta did not stop them. And then not only did Alex Acosta not stop them, but time and again, nobody stopped them. They didn't get justice when Epstein died. They are not getting justice now with Ghislaine Maxwell being moved to some, relatively plush camp where she's able to do yoga. They're not getting justice from this Justice Department who wanted to shut this all down. I mean, this is 20 years of being slapped in the face by successive administrations and successive powerful people, including the ones who raped them, but also the people who should have held those rapists accountable. It's devastating to me that it's not happening. I don't know.
Yeah. And I don't know if I just don't know how much is Comer's display of wanting more information. How much is that feeding into the MAGA group wanting to solve the conspiracy versus wanting to really get to the bottom of what the hell happened, right? I mean, and if you look at his original list, as you pointed out, it was pretty political.
It was all political. I mean, it was every enemy of the MAGA movement, right? Bill and Hillary Clinton. What does Hillary Clinton have to do with this? Like, do you think she was getting little girls for Bill Clinton? Is that your theory? I mean, I guess in some pockets of MAGA, maybe. But it's very political, and it's also political in who he didn't call. Again, why would you not call Alex Acosta and ask him, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, why would you give Jeffrey Epstein this kind of sweetheart deal? Nobody else would get that kind of deal. So who talked to you? Who were you protecting? Why did you do this? I mean, Jeffrey Epstein served 13 months, but he didn't serve. He was on a work release where he effectively went to his office and then continued to work. And then he got out of there and continue to do this. I mean,
I know, and it's like, what? I mean, Alex Acosta should be the first witness that they put up on the stand. Uh, I think if we look too at just the history of what's happened to these girls and women, that happened. Right? Well, first of all, the actual incidents happened. Then the sweetheart deal that Alex Acosta did. Then they thought they were going to get justice because uh, uh, Epstein was finally arrested later on, and then he committed suicide. So that was kind of a downer for them because that he never had to face the music. Then Ghislaine Maxwell gets sentenced, so that was somewhat of a victory. But then Trump starts calling it a hoax, and then he moves her to her yoga studio, and now they're not involving them in wanting to get to the bottom of this. So it is just sort of a political circus, and you and I are screaming from the mountaintops like how important it is to involve them. But as we wrote in our other op-ed for Time, if people want to check it out, we actually still think that this is progress because the American public wants the answers, and they're not saying they don't believe the survivors is the bottom line. They're not saying that. They're wanting information to find out who the perpetrators are. And to us, that is progress. But now we want to take that a step more and say, okay, thank you for believing them. But now let's hear from them if they want. And by the way, I've watched lawyers on TV over the last couple of weeks who represent these women who say that they've never been consulted for anything, including being able to get a copy of their own testimony.
Well, that's the part that I think is not talked about enough. These women have as much access to this information as the rest of us do, which is crazy because they're the victims. I hate to use that word, but they were victimized as girls by really powerful men. I mean, we know this. We know that it wasn't just Jeffrey Epstein, and we know that it wasn't just Ghislaine Maxwell. And yet nobody's been held accountable. These girls' lives, I don't want to say they're ruined because you see some of them, they're so impressive. They've made tremendous things out of themselves after this. But I mean, if you are trafficked as a little girl, and some of these girls were 13 years old. I mean, there is there not testimony, but there are allegations that there's a 13-year-old girl who obviously had never had sex before who was forced, to do this. How do you recover from that? And think about this. So I think it's just nauseating is not even the word, that they're not taking into account the very people who were harmed in all of this, that it's become a political football for both sides, that all anybody wants to talk about is, was Donald Trump one of these people? Was Bill Clinton one of these people? These women know who these people are.
Maybe.
Look, I will say this. If you are high profile enough, you are, Bill Clinton was on TV who the former president of the United States is. Donald Trump was on TV 24/7. Prince Andrew was on TV 24/7. I'm not suggesting that any of these people were involved. I'm simply saying that if it's somebody of that level, even teenage girls who obviously watch other things would know who they are. Certainly, Virginia Giuffre knew that.
Well, but you're assuming they weren't blindfolded, or that there weren't other measures taken to protect these high-profile people because of what you're just arguing now, that they were known.
Maybe, but then nobody would know, right? So I wonder why the Trump administration is fighting so hard to keep these files secret. Sometimes the obvious answer is the answer, right? And I don't understand whom they're protecting and why they're protecting them, because ultimately I cannot think of a worse crime than what happened to these girls. I know how traumatic it was when you and I went through what we went through at Fox, and yet, as we keep saying, and we said in our Time op-ed, we were adults, we were in stable relationships, we were financially secure, and we weren't raped, right? none of that applies to these little girls. So I think it's just something that we need to, think about and wonder why they're being protected, which I think is just.
Well, we could go on and on with that. Like the biggest argument against that is that if Biden had access to these files and saw that Trump was mentioned, he would have put it out there. So,
Well, Biden, yeah.
Although the one caveat to that is, sorry to interrupt, the one caveat to that is from a legal perspective. Apparently, because Ghislaine Maxwell still has one appeal left with the Supreme Court, the argument is that the administration would not have put out that information because it would have jeopardized that whole situation. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, but that is the one argument.
That is the lawyer who I'm married to said that is actually a legitimate argument. I asked him the same thing.
Okay.
And that's one. And two, I think we all know and have experienced Merrick Garland, the former attorney general. I don't think in my worst nightmare that he would ever do this, because he was so concerned about politicizing any aspect of his office. It took him 2 years to open an investigation into the January 6th debacle at the Capitol. So, it's just not that kind of attorney general. It's not that kind of administration. And I think they would have been immediately accused of politicizing the office. And I think that was a huge concern for Merrick Garland, the former attorney general. He did not want to be perceived as politicizing that office, in addition to the very legitimate thing that you said, which is you don't release this information unless all the hearings and all the trials and all the appeals have been exhausted. You can't.
Well, now this information is going to be released Friday, apparently, to the committee, and Bill Barr testified yesterday. So, former attorney general for Trump. I don't know if we would hear what he said if it would leak, but I think we would. So, Bill Barr, yeah, files, and but apparently, I don't know what he said, but nothing has leaked. There was a lot of other shit going on yesterday at the White House, so that could be also. But that story still broke through the Zelensky meeting. The fact that the Department of Justice is releasing the files to the committee on Friday, which is interesting because they were subpoenaed. I think they could have come up with a million reasons to delay that. So who knows what they're going to hand over?
They're releasing some files. They're releasing some files. Not all the files, they said. Look, Bill Barr is a very interesting person in this whole scenario, because Bill Barr's father, we've talked about this before, Bill Barr's father was the headmaster at a very elite private school in New York called the Dalton School, and hired Jeffrey Epstein as his math teacher there, despite the fact that Jeffrey Epstein had no credentials to be a math teacher because he was not a college graduate, and schools like that just don't hire people who don't have college degrees. We also know that people don't wake up one day and start molesting little girls. That's something that they have a proclivity to do. So the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was working at the school with a bunch of teenage girls under Bill Barr's father, I think is interesting. And he went from the Dalton School, where he was probably making, I don't know what the salary in the 80s was, but probably $30,000 or $40,000 a year, to suddenly being a billionaire and being the Jeffrey Epstein who had private planes and private islands and townhouses in New York and mansions in Florida and estates in New Mexico. And the question is, why did that happen? How did that happen? Why did Bill Barr's father hire him without credentials? And what happened at the Dalton School? Because, as I've said before many times, I am positive that there are probably a number of NDAs from Dalton students who brought up concerns about Jeffrey Epstein. And Bill Barr's father, as the headmaster, probably settled and probably had NDAs with the school to ensure that none of that came out. So I'm also here to say to any women who might be those girls at the Dalton School, those NDAs are probably null and void. So feel free to speak up if you want.
Why do you say they're null and void?
Well, first of all, if they're with Jeffrey Epstein, he's dead.
Yeah, well, mine isn't, and Roger Ailes.
Well, yeah, but the difference is I don't think Jeffrey Epstein's estate would sue them. And the question with the Dalton School is, if they're with the Dalton School, I sincerely doubt the Dalton School would sue them for speaking up about this. I just can't believe it. It would be such a stupid thing for the school to do.
Yeah, totally. And I
Yeah,
think we talked about this last week. The
yeah,
brother of Jeffrey Epstein, I don't think if he's in charge of the estate, he would not sue them either.
he's in
So
charge of the state. Yeah.
um, that would be interesting.
It
That
would be because that's a part of Epstein's life that's never been explored. But again, as I've said, you don't wake up one day and decide that you're going to rape teenage girls. And working at a school where you're surrounded by nothing more than teenage girls. I mean, what a great opportunity for somebody like Jeffrey Epstein to do what he did. And I'm positive that, of course, if there were any concerns raised, immediately there were settlements, immediately there were NDAs placed. And that's a shame because if Bill Barr's father had done something about it, and if that actually happened, perhaps Jeffrey Epstein would have been arrested then, and none of this would have happened later, where he became this very prominent guy in society.
well, does anyone know how he became so rich?
No, no. But he went straight from Dalton, where, as I said, he made nominal amounts of money to suddenly becoming so rich. And nobody understands how he became so wealthy. And everybody kept saying he's a whiz with investing. But he never worked as an investor. Like, I understand how the chairman of Goldman Sachs became so rich, right? I understand how Donald Trump became so rich. Sort of. You understand how Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg became so rich. Nobody's ever given a good answer as to how Jeffrey Epstein went from being a math teacher at an elite school without a college degree. And again, this is not a knock on people who don't have college degrees. It's just a fact that those schools do not hire people like that. They don't hire people who don't have college degrees. I don't understand how and that's a question for Bill Barr. Maybe he doesn't know. His father, I think, is no longer alive, but why his father would hire Jeffrey Epstein. So there's a personal Barr family connection to Jeffrey Epstein that's really never been explored.
Well, that's really interesting. I bet he was not asked anything about that yesterday.
No.
By the way, he could just say he has no idea because.
Of course. But it is an interesting twist, and it's a very interesting coincidence that Bill Barr was the attorney general when Epstein was arrested, placed in prison, and then now Jeffrey Epstein's dead. I mean, all of it, what are the odds that your father hired Jeffrey Epstein and then you're the son who's now nominally prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein, who's then, of course, no longer alive to be prosecuted? The whole thing is just, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist whatsoever, but these are all legitimate questions and they just don't add up.
Well, just to take it a step more, Bill Barr had a falling out with Trump. So it would be odd if they were, again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist either. However, I am a journalist and an investigator in my brain. It would be odd if they both knew information and somehow decided not to say anything because they had a falling out, right? Like there's no need to protect one another.
I mean, sort of, they had a falling out, but not enough, I don't think, for Bill Barr to turn on him. I mean, Bill Barr covered for him on the Russian election interference, which then allowed Trump to go and say that it's a hoax. Now he's saying that the Epstein files are a hoax. All of it is a hoax, which is strange to say because we know that these survivors exist. We know that what happened to them is not a hoax. A woman was convicted and imprisoned based on the testimony of those survivors by a jury of her peers. They didn't think it was a hoax. But Bill Barr really laid the groundwork for Trump to be able to say a lot of these things are a hoax. And again, the weird coincidence of his father hiring a deeply unqualified math teacher at a school where you have hundreds of teenage girls is just, I guess it's a coincidence, but what a strange coincidence it is.
What would be interesting to know for some investigative reporter is whether or not they hired other unqualified people during that time period.
That would be a great question. But, I live in New York and I have a child who goes to one of these schools. And I can tell you that half the teachers have PhDs and the others have some sort of advanced degree. There's just no way. I mean, there's just no way.
But this was 45 years ago. But still, I hear what you're saying.
Listen, I went to a school like that, not in New York, but in New Jersey at the same time in the 80s, that in early 90s, that he was doing this kind of stuff. None of my teachers, especially the math teachers, were not college graduates. I mean, it just at schools like that, it just doesn't happen. And how
you think that they'd hire somebody not qualified to be like lesser than doing calculus or something?
I mean, listen, apparently he was a math genius, so he was eminently qualified. I'm not suggesting that he wasn't, qualified to teach calculus, because by all accounts, he was really just some sort of math whiz. So I'm not demeaning him for not having a college degree. I mean, neither does Bill Gates, and neither does Mark Zuckerberg, and look what happened with them. Like, you don't need a college degree to be a genius when it comes to this kind of stuff. I just want to know how somebody like that got into a school like that without a college degree. You don't even get through the door typically when you apply unless you show your credentials. I mean, I don't think he took a calculus test for Bill Barr's dad to show that he could do calculus. Like, first you have to get in the door to even be interviewed. And I think one of the barriers to getting into that door is that you don't have a college degree. Again, these are all questions. I have no idea. I mean, yes, you are correct. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant man when it came to numbers. And so therefore there's no reason why he shouldn't have taught. But it's strange. And the larger question is not that. The larger question is, once he had access to all of these teenage girls at the Dalton school, did he take advantage? Because I can't imagine that somebody who has proclivities like that does not take advantage. Now, it was a different time. People weren't aware. Kids certainly weren't aware of these kinds of situations. As I said, I'm a peer of these girls. If some teacher hit on me, I wouldn't be running to the headmaster to report it necessarily, but maybe. And if that happened, I am positive that the school did what organizations do, which is try to sweep it under the rug, and we're going to settle, and here's an NDA, and you don't talk about it and we don't talk about it. I'm sure the girls didn't want to talk about it, because especially as a teenage girl, why would you ever want to talk about something like that?
Yeah.
But if that happened, those girls who are now women in their 50s and maybe even early 60s know about this, and it's a legitimate question as to what happened. I don't know. That's the point. I guess we don't know.
We don't know, but to sum it up, this is why we think it's so important for the survivors to be included in this conversation and to be asked to testify if they want to. And that is a huge piece of the puzzle that you can't ignore if you're doing the right thing. So that is our plea today, is that if you're going to release information to the committee Friday, you better get the permission of the survivors, number one. And number two, you better not redact the third parties, because that's just going to lead to another civil war. And number three, call the survivors to testify, because we need to get to the bottom of this, but we need to do it in the right way.
And let me just finish on one thought. Dan Bongino, who Gretchen and I both know from our Fox days, who, I'm going to just say my point of view, has never been particularly stable. But he said something that I thought was very interesting, that he has read through all the Epstein files and he will never be the same again. He is completely just appalled and just could not believe what he read. Now, he's prone to hyperbole. He's fundamentally, as I said, not a stable guy. But you haven't heard from him since Bondi said that she was not going to release the Epstein files, except that he was so appalled that he didn't go to work the next day. He's apparently now back. Now, last night, news broke, and again, kind of covered up a little bit, that there is now going to be a deputy FBI director. They're basically overlaying Bongino. And the question is, why? Do they not want him? Is he not on the team anymore? What is going on? Because Bongino's gone radio silent. And I believe he probably did read those Epstein files, because he has the access to them that he would have as a deputy FBI director. Why is Bongino suddenly being overlaid? Just something to think about.
No, totally. I mean, I saw an interview this morning with a former deputy director. They never had two people. I mean, he said it would have been nice because there was so much work from time to time, but I don't think that's why he's being overlaid. And by the way, he's not being overlaid with somebody who's actually an expert in the field, not that Ken Patel and Dan Bongino are either, because they're not.
Yeah.
But, it's not like they're bringing in somebody who can suddenly lead the FBI because
they're bringing another loyalist from, but
it is interesting they don't fire Dan Bongino.
Well, he can't fire Dan Bongino because I guess Dan Bongino might know too much.
Well, I know. That's the interesting thing. Well, it's all a big mystery, and we presented how we think we should get to the bottom of it and the people that you should not forget in the process. And on that note, have a fabulous Tuesday. Let's see what comes of this for the rest of the week, and we will keep following it.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.